Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you. And I think what I'd like
Lots
to
of
do,
questions then. I get to have all the questions.
you do get to all have all the questions. So what I was thinking is, since I was struggling yesterday with the translation of this grammatical point that Rashi was making, that it was worth going back over it, see if I could do a better
Okay.
job. And I was also thinking about the concept, that having you watch me struggle with stuff is not such a bad thing either. There is this concept of amelim batorah, and the word amelim had to do with the idea of laboring, not just working, not just studying, but having to labor in the Torah. And that's part of the benefit too, is the actual, the struggle and trying to figure out what it is. So let's take a look. So I'm going to go on back. So even though we're ready to go on, so let's see, here we go. So it's actually the previous, okay, right here.
That's good because I missed the beginning because I was at PT and
Okay.
then, so that works for me.
All right. So it's Kigava, right? And so here's the verse itself, right? Vayiru kol ha'edah, the entire congregation saw Kigava Aharon. And this word ki has several meanings, right? So it can mean because Aaron had died, right? Aaron had died. Or it simply can mean that Aaron had died. And Rashi wants to clarify that the word ki cannot mean because, right? So in other words, let's keep going and see, right? And all the congregation saw, because Aaron had died, vayivku et ha'aron shloshim yom, they cried, they mourned for Aaron 30 days, kol Beit Yisrael, the entire house of Israel. Okay. So, whether or not they cried because he had died or something like that, but it doesn't really make sense because the ver, right, is like an and, it's a conjunction. So, and the fact is that the word ki will support the translation that, and that's is what Rashi is going to spill some ink over. And here we go. And I assume he must have said this. I'm inferring this that it wasn't that Rashi was doing this, as a sequestered monk. I'm sure first of all, we know that he attended academies in Germany. And not only that, I suspect that he had ongoing conversations with other scholars, etc. And perhaps there was an argument over this, and Rashi wanted to prove his point. I'm just sort of trying to infer from the fact that he gets personal about this. He says, Omer ani, I say, right? He doesn't say that too often. Normally he is simply sharing or interpolating or whatever it is, tradition. But here he's talking about a grammatical point, and he says, Omer ani, I would claim, sheha mitagem daha, right? Mit to'ehu. That if you translate this as because, in other words, something like that indeed, or whatever, but because, that because he died, to'ehu, that is a mistake. You're making a mistake. Ella imkain mitagem vayiru, okay, unless you translate the word vayiru as they saw, the itchaziu, meaning and they were seen, something like that. In other words, that we see it as a passive voice. They were seen. Shelo amru zichronenu rabotenu zichronam livracha, because, and here this is an ella, right? So there's a law, right? Law and an ella. Do you see the ella over there? And and the way the Hebrew syntax works, it means not but, and it means only. That's the way we translate in English, right? That our rabbis of blessed memory only said ki zeh mishamesh, that this word ki, mishamesh belashon daha, can be understood as meaning because, ella al midrash, only regarding, they only said that regarding a midrash, shenistalku ananei kavod, that when Aaron died, these clouds of glory which protected them disappeared. Ukidamar Rabbi Abahu, and not only that, we can go on quoting Rabbi Abahu, who's mentioned in the tractate Rosh Hashanah, so, page 3. So this is a very solid citation. The Amar Rabbi Abahu, the statement from Rabbi Abahu goes, Rabbi Abahu said, Al tikre vayiru, do not read this as they saw, in other words, that the Israelites saw, ela vayir'au, but rather they were seen. In other words, they were exposed. The alashon zeh, and if we understand this vayir'u as vayir'au, they were exposed, they were seen, nofel lashon daha. In that case, the word because makes sense. Lefi shehu netinatam, because it is giving the reason, lama, right, lama shelama lahemenu, because then it's explaining what immediately precedes it. Okay, in other words, the people were exposed because Aaron had died. Right, so now we can translate the word ki as because. In other words, Aaron had died, the clouds had disappeared, and now the people were exposed, right? Exposed to attack, etc. And now we've got a key meaning, why, right? Okay, Hemenu, lama, right? Vayirahu. Why were they exposed? Why were they, quote, seen? Lefi shahare mate Aharon, because in fact Aaron had died. That's why they were exposed. Aval al tigum v'chazu. But if we're going to translate this word vayiru as they saw, kol kanishta, that the entire congregation saw, ein lashon dahan nofel. It doesn't make sense to translate the word ki as because. You cannot understand it as because. Ela lashon asher. But you only can understand it as that. Shehu migzerat shimush, and he's saying which it because it's in that case a utility word, right? And I think shematzinu, and he says, and we also find that the word mishamesh belashon asher, the word which can often be translated as with an aleph, not an ayin, the word can mean if, but it also can be understood in the sense of the word asher, meaning that. Kamor, and now he gives a quote from Job 21, the immadua lo tiktsar ruchi, right? And here it says, the im here doesn't mean if, but simply that. Madua usually means why. Why did I not become discouraged? Right. V'harbe meforshim mizeh, and many explain this language, mizeh halashon, from this kind of language, im charutzim yamav, right? So not if his days are determined, but rather that his days are determined. So this is as I said, this was this relatively long for Rashi explanation here. And I would go back on my first assumption that the reason why Rashi goes into this and makes such a point over it is that it was challenged, that he'd had a discussion with someone or read something and was very concerned that somebody was misinterpreting and mistranslating this word ki here in this sentence. So, are there any questions before I move on now? Are we relatively comfortable? David, good morning. Good to see you.
I have in the JPS it
Yes.
says the whole community knew in that kind of way
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Yes.
that that Aharon
Right.
had breathed his
Right.
last.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah,
so
it's a nice translation of Vayiru, right?
it is.
Because when you say I see your point, what does that really mean? It means understand. When I say I see your point, I'm saying to you, I understand your point.
Yes.
I get it. I get it.
Uh-huh.
So it's nice. I
Yeah.
don't have any problem with that translation at all. All right. New subject. Vayishma HaKnaani, and the Canaanite, Melech Arad, king of Arad, Yoshev HaNegev, who dwelt in the Negev, and we should be saying da 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 da, seeing this term Yoshev HaNegev, dwelling in the Negev, in the southern area. Kiba Yisrael, that the Israelites had arrived. Derech Atarim, by way of the Atarim. Okay. And again, the word Atarim could come from the word Tarim, which could mean something to the effect of, the pilgrims, this is the way people came. Vayilachem Yisrael, and did battle with the Israelites. Vayishp mimenu shevi, and he seized some captives from him. Now, the word shevi is in the singular, and we'll see how Rashi pounces on that with that. All right, so few things. Vayishma Haknani, the Canaanite heard. Now, notice it does, we know that it's true, one of those 7 nations that were living in that area were Canaanites, but in general, it's sort of that is the agglomeration of all those nations. They were known as Canaanites, right? So, Vayishma Haknani, the Canaanite heard. What did he hear? Shama Shemet Aharon. He heard that Aaron had passed on, had died, Venistalku Anane Kavod, and that these clouds of glory, the clouds of divine presence, the clouds that protected the people, Chule, etc., etc. You can fill in the gaps. Kede'ita Rosh Hashanah Daf Gimel, as we find on Rosh Hashanah, page 3. We've had that reference with Rabbi Abahu, right? The Amalek me'olam ritzu'ah mardut Yisrael. And the truth is that the Amalekites, from time immemorial, you could say, have been a strap of rebellion against the Israelites, meaning that they are the strap to smack the Israelites when they act in a rebellious way. I think that's what it means, right? I think unless it means simply that they were a rebellious strap, it could actually go both ways. At any rate, just going on, Mizuman, prepared, Bechol 8, here we go, at any time, at any given time, the Pur Anut, for retribution. And we'll see, I think that they are seen as a way in which God takes retribution against the erring Israelites, that the Amalekites are there. But it could definitely be understood as simply in another sense too, that they were always ready to give the Israelites trouble. Yoshev HaNegev. So why this little phrase, dweller of the Negev? And wait a second, wasn't he talking about Canaanites? Why did we just mention Amalekites? How did they jump into the question? So here we go, Ze Amalek, right? When it says dwellers of the Negev, that is telling you that it is talking about the Amalekites. How do we know this? Shene Emar, because it says in Bamidbar Yud Gimel, right? When the spies come and report their report to the Israelites, Moses and the Israelites, remember, and tell them they'll never make it. They say these words, Amalek Yoshev be'eretz HaNegev. They say the Amalekites are dwelling in the Negev area, right? Veshina et lishono, but the Torah didn't use that expression. It used a different expression, the daber belashon Canaan, to rather refer to the Amalekites as Canaanites and not as Amalekites. Kedei sheyu Yisrael mitpalalim lakodesh baruch hu, so that the Israelites would pray to God, latet knaanim bayadam, to put the Canaanites under their control. In other words, not just the Amalekites, but all the other Canaanites as well, that the Israelites would be praying to God to be successful against the Canaanites, and not just the Amalekites, if the text had just mentioned Amalekites. Vehem einan knaanim, okay, and they are not Canaanites. In other words, this is interesting, right? Okay. And they themselves, in other words, the Amalekites, this is what it's sounding like, are not, in fact, Canaanites. You can't really call the Amalekites Canaanites. Why can't you call the Amalekites Canaanites? Do any of you know? Why were they not Canaanites? Because the Amalekites were actually descendants of Esau. Interestingly enough, that's who the Amalekites were. Amalek, I believe, was a grandson of Esau. And of course, the Canaanites came from a whole different line. They came from Noah's son Ham, whereas Esau would have come from Noah's son Shem. So they were not Canaanites at all. However, plot is going to thicken. Ra'u Yisrael levushehem kilevushe Amalekim. When the Israelites saw these people, the Amalekites, they saw that they dressed like Amalekites. Lishonam lishon Canaan. However, their speech, their language, was the language of Canaan. Amru, they said, nitpalel stam. So the Israelites said, well, if we're going to pray, let's pray in a general way, not specifically. Shne'emar, because it says, Imnaton titen et ha'am hazeh biyadi. They go on to say, if you place this nation under my control. End of story. Derech ha'atarim, right? So this is a place called the Way of the Atarim. Derech HaNegev. Yes, David.
Yeah. So because the Amalekites were descendants of Esau, it doesn't that also further provide some backing to your statement earlier that they were there to kind of smack the Israelites when they rebelled? You know, I mean, it fits into the whole concept, right? So
right. There's an echo there, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, because Anyway, that's all I wanted to mention. Okay.
Nice. No. Thank you. I wasn't thinking of that, so I really appreciate you mentioning that. Right. Good. Excellent. All right. So Derech HaTarim, Derech HaNegev. This is by way of the south. Shalchu b'hameraglim, because remember, the spies, those 12 spies back in Parshat Shlach, that was the way they went. Shneimar, as it states, Vaya'alu b'Negev. They went up by way of the Negev. So Derech HaAtarim could mean, I think what Rashi is saying is the way of the spies, right? The way that the Atarim, right? Latur et haaretz, to spy out the land, that it's a rephrasing or a rewording of the word spies. But that's what it means, the way of the spies. Davar acher, right? Now, a different interpretation. Derech ha'atarim, again, still hanging on to this idea of the spy or the scout, right? Derech hatayar hagadol, by way of the great scout, capital S, capital G, hanosea lifnehem, who would journey before them. Shne'emar, as it says, derech shloshet yamim, referring to the pillar of cloud, that it would go a journey, a 3 days journey, latur lahem menucha, so as to scout out for them. There's that word tour, right? A menucha means rest, right? That they, or possibly an encampment, right? A place to encamp. Vayishp mimenu shevi. That is that the Amalekites took a captive. Eina ela shivcha achat. So Rashi's taking this word for word. Shevi being, it could be a singular word that refers to a large number of people, but it can also be simply a singular word. And Rashi is based on a Yalkut. It's a midrash, B'Shem Midrash, in the name of a midrash, that they only took one. They were only capable or able to capture one handmaiden. That's it. Let's see. Go on. Vayidar Yisrael neder Lashem vayomar. And the Israelites took an oath, took a vow, made a vow. Neder, yidar, there's the nun. Notice the dot in the dalet, which in a way takes the place of the fact that there's an elided nun here, because the root is neder. Just there it is. And Israel made a vow, Lashem, to God, vayomar, and they stated, Im naton titen et ha'amazeh. Remember, that's Rashi quoted that for us, right? This general statement, this general vow made in a general way. If you surely hand over, give me this nation, biadi, if you put them in my hand, in other words, if you place them under my control, v'hacharamti et arehem, I shall utterly destroy their cities. But it also means that any benefit from that capture would be dedicated to the sanctuary, that they would take no personal gain from this. Vehecheramti. So Rashi spells it out, right? I shall utterly destroy, akdish shlalam lagavoha. I will sanctify the booty that comes from them to the high one, on high, meaning, of course, dedicated to the sanctuary. We'll take one more verse. Vayishma Hashem b'kol Yisrael, and Hashem listened to the voice of Israel. In other words, accepted their prayer. Nice how that's expressed in the Hebrew. Vayiten et haknaani, and he delivered the Canaanites. Vayacharem athem et arehem, and the Israelites understood, utterly destroyed their cities. Vayikra Shem hamakom Chorma, and they named that place Chorma. There's that word from Yacharem, right? Place of destruction. Yes, David.
So was it the Israelites then that prayed, did they create that pact that you just described where they said, okay, if the cities are destroyed, we won't take anything? Was that their initiation, or was that what God told them?
Yes. No, they offered it to God. We're not reading here that God told them to do it.
Okay.
But rather that they said, this is the deal. You put them under our control. You allow us to to retaliate, and we will not take personal advantage of that, but we will dedicate to you whatever booty comes from this retaliation.
Right. And so the question would be, if they still had the cloud, would they have done that? Right? Because I'm assuming they
yeah,
did that prayer
yes,
because it the cloud of protection anymore, right?
that's
And so
right.
they couldn't,
Absolutely. Very
they
good.
couldn't yeah,
Yeah,
they couldn't walk in there and destroy everybody because
right,
they didn't have the cloud. So
right.
now they had to make a pact in order to yeah,
I
okay.
love it. I love it. Again, I'm so appreciate your adding to this discussion. Yes, it does make sense. It connects again the death of Aaron, and of course, it doesn't mention anything about the cloud in the text. It is totally part of oral tradition, and yet the text bears out that oral tradition in just the way you said.
Interesting. So then you have to ask the question. I'll stop after this, but then it
Okay.
kind of begs the question of human nature, right? Because if
Yes.
they had the cloud, would they have gone in and looted all the cities because the cloud would have protected them and not dedicated it to God? But instead, because they didn't have you see where I'm going with this, right?
So,
So
no, go ahead. You can spell it out. But I mean, my understanding is this wasn't necessarily, I'm thinking, going to be part of the land of Canaan, this area.
got it.
Negev area. That's how I'm understanding this, that this is all on the outskirts and the boundaries of the land of Israel that was going to become the land of Israel.
Yeah,
And,
I was just thinking more along the lines of human nature, right?
yeah,
Because human nature would have been, so because they had to make this pact, it makes them more, let's say righteous, whatever the right word is,
ah,
because they you know what I mean? They can't steal personally, right? So because they made the pact, so they
right.
have to do everything to God. They had the cloud, but we won't know, right? So
Right,
so
right. We have to speculate, but then
yeah,
we would have to think that the Amalekites would not have attacked them had the cloud been there to protect them,
yeah,
and they had
true.
not been exposed. There wouldn't have been any booty. There wouldn't have been anything like
Got
that.
it.
They simply would have marched on into the land of Israel.
Got it. Yeah. Okay.
Canaan.
So got it. Okay. Thanks.
No,
Appreciate it.
thank you, David. This was lovely. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll just do this. V'acharem ethem. We'll finish this up, right? And he says Baharega. In other words, they killed them. They killed these people. Ve'et arehem, but it says and their cities. Charme gavoha. In other words, they were given over to and sanctified. They were given to the sanctuary. They did not personally benefit in that way. This is, of course, very tough stuff. And let me mark the place for, so we will not meet tomorrow, but please God, we will meet Friday. Okay, and let me mark the page. And I'm going to stop the share.
Yeah, let's hope we get to this to the serpent because
Yeah.
that's the cool stuff.